Everyone who's joined us here in person, congratulations for navigating visas and flights and financial hardship and schedules to actually get here. And for anyone who's watching us online, a warm welcome to you as well. The session is being recorded, and so some people may be watching this in the future, and welcome to those of you who are watching a recording of this session. My name's Jeff O'Malley. I'm with UNDP. I'm the Senior Advisor on LGBTI plus inclusion for the Africa region with UNDP, having worked in the past mostly on HIV for many years, and I'm moderating the session here today. We have a really great panel. We've got three colleagues joining. Oops, sorry. Hello, is that Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure what that was about. We have a great panel here today, three panelists in person. We may be joined virtually by a fourth panelist from Ghana, where if you see me playing with my phone, we're just trying to get him properly logged on to into the virtual space. But we have a great panel here and look forward to also hearing from many of you in the discussion period. With us today, we have Fisayo Owayeni, who's a Nigerian-based queer activist who's been helping to improve the lives and well-being of queer Nigerians for many years. In the past, she's worked mainly with lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, focused on issues of socioeconomic well-being as well as sexual and reproductive health. And currently, Fisayo is the Community of Action Facilitator for the We Lead program in Nigeria. So welcome, Fisayo. We have Liberty Matisse, who's the Executive Director of Gender Dynamics, which is the oldest registered trans-specific human rights organization in Africa. Liberty identifies as a trans non-binary person. They hold a master's degree in law focused on non-discrimination and marriage equality for transgender persons. And they can be defined as a community-centered and intersectional feminist and a human rights and social justice activist whose passion is fighting for dignity, equality, and freedom for trans and gender diverse persons. And that's what drives her or their dedication to change. Finally, we have Flavian Rode, who's the Executive Director of Positive Vibes. And I'd also like to thank Positive Vibes and the We Lead program for helping to bring this panel together. Positive Vibes partners with UNDP on our regional LGBTI work in Africa, and Flavian is central to that. He has over 15 years of development sector experience in health and person-centered human rights-based programming. And with Positive Vibes, he's working not only in Africa, but he's brought Positive Vibes work around the world, spanning Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Central America. So a round of applause, please, to welcome the panel. So why are we here today? You would have seen in the program that the focus of the discussion today is about strengthening alliances between LGBTI plus people and key population activists in Africa. I think probably everyone in this room knows very well that HIV responses in Africa increasingly do include attention to key populations. And that's helped create political space to discuss LGBTI issues, as well as increasing funding, especially for groups working on HIV with men who have sex with men and trans women. But despite that, many LGBTI activists have expressed concerns about the implications of key population language and thinking and labels and funding. This includes include the lack of attention to HIV in LBQ women, for example, or trans men or intersex people, concerns about how groups which get HIV funding and end up having much more capacity and presence and influence than groups that are not involved in HIV work, leading to an uneven representation and capacity of LGBTI activists. The two movements also, as much as they overlap, they often use different tactics to drive change. Key population activists who've been involved in HIV for a long time have often become consummate insiders, working with groups like PEPFAR, the Global Fund, and via those partnerships with ministries of health and other parts of government, really working as insiders, while most LGBTI activists continue to really work as outsiders. And those different approaches can also create tensions. So what we want to do today is reflect on what lessons have been learned from each of those overlapping movements in Africa, working on their own, working with each other, and to start discussing why, how, and when LGBTI activists and key population activists can most benefit and most effectively drive forward a common agenda by collaborating together more than they have in the past. So that's the point of the discussion. I believe that Mac Darling is not yet online. Oh, he's on. So I've just got a message. So can our tech people, can we have Mac Darling on the screen so I can just confirm he's with us? Hi, Mac Darling. Nice to have you with us. I'm sorry you couldn't be here in person. Mac Darling is joining us from Ghana. Many of you know that in Ghana there is a really dreadful piece of legislation being considered in Parliament right now to further criminalize not only homosexual activity, but even education and solidarity and health work related to LGBTI issues, which has drawn a lot of attention in both the HIV world and the LGBTI world to Ghana. Mac Darling's been involved in this work for a very long time in Ghana. Mac Darling, can I ask you to reflect a little bit as a long-time LGBTI and HIV activist? What are your lessons about working on these issues from an HIV perspective, and how do you work well, and what are the tensions in terms of collaborating with a young new generation of queer activists in Ghana? Over to you.
Okay, so good day to everyone. I'm not sure the time, it's evening here, so we started as an underground organization trying to provide program services for the LGBTI community in Ghana. Over the years, we've had challenges in terms of registering as an LGBTI organization, and we also noticed that the struggle in Ghana, if it comes to the surface, there's a lot of challenges. So we decided to do what we call revolution from within. So what we try to do is that we tried as an organization to build capacities of individuals and organizations in the grassroots. And we try to also focus more on working with our community members, building capacity so that they can take over the work. Because we realize that when we focus on the homophobes or those who hate, they never change their ideologies. It's difficult to change their ideologies. It's difficult to get some understanding from them or acceptance from them. But then if we focus on our people, then we can be able to withstand the challenges that the homophobes pose to our community. And so that's what we've done so far. So we started also when there was no organization focused on the topic in Ghana, where the topic is a taboo topic. And currently, the good thing is that we have almost 18 organizations that are doing some programming with the LGBTI community in Ghana, focusing on different angles of the community. The good thing also is that we have a strong young LGBTI movement who are really challenging the system, like the status quo, by posing and challenging the law which has been placed in Parliament, showing faces. We have a strong trans and intersex movement that are actively engaging publicly in Ghana today. And these are, for me, what I'll call our revolution from within. We're trying to work underground to empower groups and people to be able to challenge the systems in which have been put in place by the homophobic people. So far, I think this is what I can say. Maybe if someone will say something before I come in later.
Thanks so much for that, those introductory remarks. And we will hear from all the panelists and come back to you and invite people from the audience as well to make comments and ask questions, Mac Darling. So Fisayo, maybe staying in West Africa. And if Mac Darling has worked really very heavily in this HIV frame, you come from an LBQ women's activist frame. So from that perspective, what have you seen as the as an LBQ activist, have you engaged with HIV key population activists? What's worked well, what's not worked well? And what are your recommendations for the future?
I'm going to start by saying, talking a bit about how Nigeria is a very hostile environment when it comes to LGBTI issues. And because of that, it is difficult to come directly and say we are advocating for LGBTI issue, LGBTI rights. So the entry point when it came to health was public health, and that kind of created a tension, which was around how do we separate HIV from human rights? Do we link both together or do we separate it? So that kind of created a huge lot of tension. And also when the HIV program started, it was mainly target driven. Like how many people are infected, how many people, have their, medicine and all. So that kind of, left out a huge chunk of human rights violations that are, occurring even that is out of HIV programming. And also, LGBTI women have been, excluded because there is the misconception around how lesbian women are low risk. So lesbian women are not even included in programming. So it's majorly focused around the MSM community. It's majorly focused around the gay community. So, but consequently, now there has been conversation around there is a need for inclusion of LGBTQ women because you cannot say because they are low risk, they should be excluded. LGBTQ women still get infected with HIV. Then also there is also the conversation around we cannot continue to have a divide between the HIV movement and the LGBT movement because consequently we have to work together. For instance, when the SSMPA, which is the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act, was passed in Nigeria, everybody had to work together because it is now not around the HIV programming. It is not only LGBTI movement alone because now we have to work together. Everybody had to work together because it affects us as a whole. And we cannot continually say that HIV movement is going to be separate, while LGBTI movement is going to be separate. So we were able to now understand that we cannot work in silos. We have to work together as a whole to push for our rights, to push for the agenda. So that is where we are currently in Nigeria, and we are also understanding the need for inclusion of everyone. Regardless of your sexuality, regardless of your gender identity, everybody needs to be on board to advocate together.
That's great. Maybe if I can just ask a quick follow-on question before we go to other panelists. Are there any key lessons you think that HIV activists in Nigeria should be learning from you as an LBQ woman, or vice versa?
I would say that, first of all, our work should never be target-driven. It should be focused on the people, the change, the impacts we are trying to create. It shouldn't have to be with numbers. It shouldn't have to be with how many LGBTI people are infected with HIV, how many human rights violations can you record. It has to be impact-oriented. What changes are we trying to make? What difference are we trying to make? What policies, what laws are we trying to make to ensure that everyone's right is protected? Then there's another thing also around gatekeeping, which is very, very common around the work that we do. Like older people, older generation are not giving space for younger activists to be in spaces, to be the one to advocate, to be the one to talk about these issues, because ultimately they are the ones that are directly or indirectly, infected, impacted by all these violations, by all these unfriendly and discriminatory laws and policies. And also, I think another lesson is around resource. There is a need for us to focus on young and little organizations that are doing the work, because ultimately they are doing the grassroots work. They are the ones that is indirectly or directly working with the community. Because the bigger organizations, yes, they might have been in the space for a long time. Yes, they have access to, the huge donors and all. But the younger organizations, the grassroots organizations, are the ones that we should be focusing on, because they have direct access to the community. They understand the needs of the community. They are in direct contact, and they are also, closely affected by the impact of violations by HIV and, what you can think of.
Great. Thanks so much for that, those reflections. Let's shift to the bottom of the continent. South Africa is obviously a very different political and legal environment than Nigeria or Ghana. But it has its own challenges, as you know very well. So as a trans activist, again, not primarily focused on HIV, but also involved in HIV, what are your reflections on how the movements work well together? What, in terms of thinking of intersectionality, I think it's easy for us to talk about intersectionality, but what are your thoughts on how we can really recognize, not just recognize, but really organize and act on the multiplicity of identities we all have? Liberty.
Certainly, Jeff. I think that gender dynamics more broadly and historically have been very involved in working around broader social justice and gender justice issues for trans and gender diverse communities. And so we've been involved in the HIV response, but that has not been our sole focus. Been very much involved in looking at undoing the systemic and structural oppressions that our community members have faced with, both in South Africa, but also through partnerships across Southern Africa, and what that could look like. And I think through some of the lessons learned, what we've realized is that the divides that have been erected between HIV-specific work and broader social justice and gender justice work is to some degree very artificial. And so how do we overcome that as a challenge at this point in time to better integrate our work and our responses in order to advance human rights, health rights for our community members? We know that in sub-Saharan Africa, that is home to 2/3 of persons living with HIV. We also know that key populations, and for us that's a very problematic term to use, because key to what, and how do we define key populations, and what are some of the implications there too. But we, with a lack of better framing at this point, what we do know is that key populations contributing a significant amount of new infections on the continent and within our context as well. And so for transgender women, particularly in 2017, 2018, a study, behavioral study found that the prevalence rate of HIV amongst transgender women can be as high as 63%. The name of that study was the Botshelo-Batran study. And so there's a very much a direct link between the HIV response and broader social justice and gender justice work that needs to be championed. I think one of the other components or lessons learned is that without undoing and challenging the legal barriers that have been erected and put in place over many, many decades, we will undermine the HIV response for marginalized communities, and particularly for transgender women. How do we speak about leading a response successfully if we can't speak about access to legal gender recognition, access to gender-affirming healthcare, access to inclusive quality quality education as a comprehensive response to ensure that people are moving from a space of agency and autonomy, and not as my fellow panelists have indicated, be reduced to just a number in that particular context. And so I think the broader issue that we are grappling with is how do we recognize the importance of decriminalization and the role it plays in being able to support the HIV response, but at the same time move beyond criminalization to looking at what does it mean to create enabling legal frameworks that advance dignity, equality, and freedom for our community members. And even in the case of South Africa, when we look at a legal framework existing that protects LGBTQI plus communities, we know that there's a stark disconnect between the law and the social realities that our people continue to grapple with. And so in that particular context, what does it even mean to look at socioeconomic empowerment to ensure that people are able to effectively participate within the life of nations, within the life of societies, and not be relegated to the margins, because being relegated to the margins, whether legally or socially, does put you at risk for different health consequences. And so for us, it's really about looking beyond the very narrow framing of marginalized communities as targets and statistics, and marginalized communities only to exist within a decriminalized environment. And so looking beyond that to what does it mean to live with freedom, in its broader sense, and being able to navigate society with agency and autonomy. I think in looking at how we are dealing with community empowerment, it's a real issue. And as LGBTQI plus activists, we are troubling the idea of what it means to support and reinforce an HIV response that is not inherently invested in the broader social justice question. And I'll give you one example of the bigger intermediary organizations that's getting this big funding to be able to drive the response on behalf of the community. And there are different experiences, but from our experiences, it's very difficult getting a response that is really authentically community-led across all levels within the HIV response. So you have your peer educators that are from the community, that is sent out in the community, but at strategic decision-making level, we are not finding our community members comprehensively represented there. And so when you have that gap at strategic level, you ask yourself, to what extent are the critical realities, critical priorities that are falling off the table because these voices are not being integrated to serve that function and purpose to lead the response? So I think those are some of the lessons that we've learned. And so just perhaps to ground it a bit further is to say that we need to increase resource allocation to community-led organizations that are driving the response, but also open up more space for communities to be community members to lead at different levels within the response, and we need to be accountable for that.
Thanks, Liberty. I'd like to come back in a few minutes to both your comment about problematizing the phrase key populations and your last comment about resources and what drives donors and what doesn't drive donors. But maybe before that, Fisayo and Liberty, you, again, coming from LBQ women, from trans activist backgrounds, Mac Darling is somebody who's really always worked in the HIV space. Flavian, you started working very much in the HIV space, and you and your organization have really gone through a transition to be looking much more holistically at queer issues. So in that sense, you yourself and your organization kind of bridge these worlds. And you're from Namibia, which is also a bit of a not South Africa, but not Nigeria either. So you're kind of in the middle of this. What are your reflections on the opportunities for strength and collaboration between the movements, but also what are the limitations? I mean, I think we've got to recognize that these are overlapping but distinct movements. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So I think I have to speak about the fact that when Positive Vibes started, I mean, it's in the name, right? Historically, we've worked and had a lot of success in ensuring that people living with HIV are at the forefront of a conversation around programming, around resource allocation, and around policy and law-related issues. And then we've moved significantly at the moment into establishing ourselves as an African queer human rights organization. So I want to speak a little bit about the lessons, and maybe inherent in the lessons, I'll try and answer some of the questions about the limitations, right? And perhaps tease out a few tidbits of things I think that have worked in our experience, because I think the transition and I think dovetailing the two movements' experiences is something that we've, in my opinion at least, did quite well. When you're working in the HIV response, I think you need to recognize that there's a number of avenues, strong relationships and mechanisms, especially through the health sector with government, that is really well established. It was important for us that when we transitioned into working into the queer space or issues related to LGBT, to negotiate access for queer communities to be present at the table, to represent and speak and shape programming, and that there is not speaking on behalf of others. That invitation to access with government and having folks typically criticizing government part of a conversation is only facilitated if you are able to, if you are one of the people in the room and you fight hard that there are others who are part of the conversation. And it's something in Namibia specifically we did without being apologetic about it. That, however, I think needs to be backed up, but I would say, I guess, it needs to be backed up by delivering quality work when you do have access. In our experience, it's one thing to be an activist, but we need to be activists where our activism is rooted in solid programming that is backed up by solutions, tested with evidence, and actually delivers quality work, following through and ensuring that that work is delivered in an ethical way. That is, in my opinion, and where we have learned that you really gain trust and are often invited back into a conversation if you don't just speak off the cuff, but you come and that you're prepared. Another lesson I think is important, and I think this is also one of the challenges, is the whole plethora of stuff that comes with dismantling the politics of money and the power that goes with. It is very challenging, but I think one of the avenues in which we found some success is mechanisms that allow for ethical, community-led grant making, and that grant making needs to have a priority for investing in movement building and in core support. Another lesson I think that we've learned in bridging, I guess, the gap between our typical HIV and now more LGBT work is designing mechanisms where we can have uncomfortable conversations about performance and accountability. Saying, you did something, it wasn't done well, how can it be done? How can it be done better? And staying open to being wrong. I think that's a critical element in how we think about the sustainability of our work. And then my last point really is ensuring that we design programming that is whole system approaches. I think the way that funding is designed, the way the development typically works, is that we are forced to work in isolation because of where our money comes from. To the extent possible, ensure that we do what, I mean, I don't want to use the word intersectionality, because when you use it too much, it becomes less sexy. So I want to say something that's maybe a new sexy, maybe it's not going to work so well. But I advocate for whole person, whole body, and whole system-based approaches. And it doesn't really matter where our money comes from. I think it's important that we design programming that works across the system, individual, organizational level, with communities, considers process, and also has an applicability in the policy and law space. The extent to which we need to work across the system, and it doesn't really matter where our money comes from, ensure that that program is comprehensive in its design and inclusive, because all of us have a seat at the table. There is space for activists who are fed up and angry and impatient. That is necessary. There is space for a more science-based conversation. There is space for those of us who are representing communities and maybe can't speak that well or don't have the right words. I think the necessity of facilitating an ecosystem where there's a multiplicity in how we are represented even in our programming, is on those of us who design them. And I think that's an important, and maybe my last point around some of the lessons that I've learned in our journey of transitioning from HIV to more LGBT and queer-led type programming. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Flavian. Mac, darling, are you still with us online? If you are, I want to go back to something Fisayo said, talking about flagging some of the generational differences. And Fisayo talked about the importance of making room for young people and for new voices and grassroots groups. When I last met you in person a couple months ago, Mac Darling, with a group of HIV activists, what was striking as I looked around the table is that everyone was around my age, and I don't think we can claim to be the youth. And the LGBTI activist movement in Ghana is very much a young movement, I think. Do you have any reflections? It's obviously after dark in Accra now. Thank you for staying online. But what are your reflections, Mac Darling, on intergenerational dynamics and how it's important to make space for young people, but also how those of us who've been around also still have something to offer? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think I got when the discussion, we actually had a discussion recently as a country that when we talk about young people in terms of HIV prevention programming, what do we mean? Because, for instance, in Ghana, the program we render to the community, the LGBT community, or let's say 99.9% of the persons we reach out to are young people. We reach out to as young as even minors, but then in the process, where because of the laws, we have to make sure that everyone we reach out to legally has an adult age. So that is one of the things. And then the other thing is that when you look at the LGBTI movement, when you look at them, there are a lot of young people who have not got any qualification, who are at the forefront. And then I think that we cannot just also leave the struggle for only young people without any qualifications to be leading. I think we need to coach people, we need to train people, we need to let people learn from the best practices that we've had as over the past years. So it's not about denying young people that space. It's not about denying young people that opportunity. It's about what the requirement of donors are. Because donors want to give resources to people. And usually they will want to give the resources to people who are qualified, who have the managerial skills, who have the ability to report on figures and data to them in terms of for them to also report back to those who gave them the resources. So it's not about older activists trying to take over from the young ones, because automatically we know we will never be there forever. But what is happening is that we should create that opportunity so that the younger ones will be learning and taking over from the older activists. I must say also that we started when we have no educational qualifications. And that is exactly what is happening today. So personally, I am today in a university attending classes, trying to attain some university degrees. There are others who are exactly following the same trend. They have no qualification and they are following the movement. And if you don't take care, what will actually happen is that they will also get to their old age, like me, who is just 40 years, but I'm considered an old man. They will get to my age before they will start thinking about acquiring some educational qualification. So I think we should balance it. It's not like where there are some older people who are denying younger people access. for me, in Ghana, we see the younger people as our colleagues. We are fighting using different strategies, but then we win, and then we win for everyone. It's not about individuals. It's not about Magdalene and then his group or his organization or his people or his friends. It's about the movement. But then we have different strategies. We have those who are calling for independence now. And we also have those who are saying that, look, let's use the revolution from within, where we touch the right spots, those who matter as to when they need to be touched or contacted or reached to. We talk to these people and engage them, and we get all the needed support from these groups and people. So these are some of the things that I think we need to clarify. I think that the other thing is that if everyone is young people, we have only young people groups. We are also Africans, and then in the process, we know that we listen. Africa is a cultural thing that older people are sometimes listening to than younger people. And when older people talk, sometimes people listen than younger people. So we should not brush away or push and try to create that antagonism between the young and the old, as if the older are fighting the young ones. For us, for me, I think that we should create that vibrant connection, that intersectional relationship between the old and the young, so that we continue to work. But if we continue to create that division about that someone is old and someone is young and that we are already a marginalized population. So we should look at how we can work together. So for me, I think that is what I will want to push when it comes to the intervention. Most of the people we reach out to as programming are younger people, but there's no requirement from the donor or the program that you should put ages of the persons you reach out to or provide services to. So if the donor also require to know what kind of ages our programs reach out to, then I think there's a high tendency that they will notice that most of the persons we reach out to on the daily basis are younger people. Most of the people who we provide services at the police station who get blackmailed are persons who are between the ages of 18 and 32.
Great. Listen,
yes.
I just thank you for those reflections. Maybe I can open it up now a little bit. It's great to see the room has filled up quite a bit over the course of this conversation. We have 2 microphones, and I would invite people, please keep interventions brief, but if you have questions for any of the panelists, but also if you have an experience you'd like to share, nobody's here as an expert. I think we're all trying to, I think there's a lot of consensus about the importance of these movements working together and learning from each other. And as Flavian is saying, the importance of diversity of strategies and viewpoints. So if anybody has a story to tell about LGBTI and key population activists working well together, or any recommendations on how this could work better, please come to the mic. Invite a couple of people to speak to the mic, and then we'll come back to the panelists. Please, on the left. Introduce yourself first.
Hi, I am Charlene Donald. I work with Fisayo and Flavian. My question is specifically for Fisayo, if she can share with us some examples of how she has integrated the principle of equity and inclusivity and working with the marginalized within the marginalized, particularly in a Nigerian context.
Thank you, Charlene. I think that would be my work at We Lead. One of the things that I am particularly excited about that We Lead is doing is around ensuring that right holders are the ones at the forefront, are the ones pushing for and advocating for their right. So one of the things that I am, that We Lead is also doing is ensuring that people who are marginalized, even within the marginalized group, are, included. Flavian talked about how you don't like intersectionality, but for me, intersectionality is a huge deal, because we have to understand that within a marginalized group, there is also another marginalized group, and there is also another marginalized group within that marginalized group. So, which is what We Lead is doing, ensuring that everyone is included, people with disability, people with HIV, even people who are, sometimes, excluded due to illiteracy issue, which I think is a huge part of the work that we do in Nigeria, because a lot of times people are excluded because they do not understand English. You ask questions around English, they cannot understand. You have to also include those people. So which is what We Lead is doing, ensuring that everyone is included, and especially right holders. When I talk about right holders, I'm talking about the people who are marginalized. They are the one at the forefront. They are the one saying, these are our issues. It is not someone out there that is, speaking on this issue. They are the one pushing it and say, these are the issues, these are our challenges, these are our needs. So which is one thing I think We Lead is doing, which, is which also answers the question around streamlining programming, putting together the movement, HIV movement, LGBTI movement coming together, not saying HIV is working separately, LGBTI is working separately. The whole movement has been streamlined, like people who are working on diverse issues, disability, HIV, LGBTQI, everybody coming together and saying, yes, there is actually a way we can push for our rights. There's a way we can push the agenda if we work together collectively, and that way we are able to, say, these are issues. We are not working in silos, but working together and, pushing for the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Fisayo. There was another colleague here. Let's hear from two people before responses. But just to be fair to Flavian, I don't think he said he doesn't like intersectionality. He just said he doesn't like to use the word too often. And I think he kind of said similar stuff to you. So please introduce yourself and share your comment or question.
Hi everyone, and hi panelists. My name is Tinesh, and I'm representing the organization, the Humsafar Trust from India. We are the first organization in India started working with LGBTQI in particular. I don't have any question, but particularly I'm here to share my experiences, because I can definitely relate to the conversation coming from the organization, and particularly in India, because we have such a diverse, we are diverse country, speak different languages, follow different religions. Even when we started working in 1994, I think HIV movement was the first key where it gave us an opportunity to initiate the conversation around LGBTQ. So I definitely agree with the panelists and with their thoughts that, of course, we cannot work, differently or in silos. We have to work together, because HIV movement is the one which gives the voices to the communities. So working on the health rights and the human rights together, and I think that's the key. And that we have also learned working with, population in India. Another point I definitely like to share is about community-led approaches. That is our learning, working from 27 years from last, where whichever intervention that we design, which is focused on health or human rights, it is our responsibility as a community-based organization to take an inputs from the community and then design the program, rather than designing the program and going back to the community. I think that models really works well. So I think in even our case, I think that worked really well. And the last point I would like to make is the ownership. Of course, as a community, we have to take the ownership, our needs and the responsibility that what we have. And the biggest example that I can give is that decriminalization which happened in India in 2018. So that was the biggest example where we learned that community took the ownership of the response of reading down of section 377, which is still in the penal code, Indian penal code, and reading down of section 377. So I think these are some of the examples where community can take ownership. I think I also heard from the panelists about talking about funding. Of course, funding is a major issue for majority of the LGBTQ organization. But once we make accountable for it, I think that's the key, even for donor to realize that we should invest in the community, because making yourself accountable for these things are really important, even for the smaller organizations. So as well. So I think there are quite a few to share, but with the time constraint, I think these are some of the thoughts. Accountability, ownership as a community-based organization. If we do that, I think that would be amazing way to go ahead in future. So thank you, panelists.
Thank you very much for that. And colleague.
My name is K. Asian Kwabna. I'm from LGBT Rights Ghana, which our core mandate is to create a safe and an inclusive space for LGBT people living in Ghana. And we're also the front runners fighting against the bill the parliament is trying to introduce to criminalize LGBT people in Ghana. What I want to say is, with regards to the old and the new, we've seen the work that the older organizations have done, and we've also identified some gaps in there. So we are trying to bring up new measures and strategies to fight those things that we've seen. But what we see from the older organization is they feel that their work is, we are going to take their work from them. So there's a little bit of sabotage in there. So we can't even sit at a round table, listen to them, and get the experience and the education that we need from them. So right now, what I would want to do is, how do we get the new organizations and the older ones to sit down, since they feel their work is being threatened by the new organization and the youth?
Thank you. I want to respond to that, but instead, thank you for that contribution, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Ndombi Mchuchuti. I'm the director for ARASA, an organization that is working in 18 countries, focusing mainly on SRHR, as well as the bodily autonomy. And I'm bringing here a comment. For me, the issues that were brought about HIV are multifaceted and they're multidimensional. Depending on the world that you are sitting at, they present themselves with a different face. So we cannot have a one strategy for everything else. We need everyone. Because initially HIV presented itself from the medical point of view when it was the issue of disease progression and so forth. Then it transformed and became the issue of the economy. It transformed and became the legal issues, the legal frameworks and everything else. And when we're looking at LGBTI today and looking at HIV, there's a divide that has been created by the economy, embedded in the legal frameworks. Silently, but at the back of it is the issue of funding. So depending on who is funded the most and by whoever is funding them, we create a divide. But I'm saying here we need each other, regardless of where we are. To build a movement, it doesn't mean if you're in a different atmosphere or a different setup, you cannot be part and parcel of the movement. A movement is a voice, and the voice can go to places where our body can't. We are sitting here right now in this conference and we are representing communities and societies from other countries that are not here. If we have got that one voice to demand contagion and speak in one voice, regardless of who we are and where we are, we can build a global movement and bring the LGBTIQ issues to the fore. Because in my country, for example, in Zimbabwe, the issue is legal. But in some country, the issue will be economic. And in other countries, it will be the access to health. And to other countries, it will be the SRHR. So if we stand here and say we bring ourselves together and work in collaboration, those that are able to provide the information from the information hub, those that are able to speak louder, they speak. Those that are able to get funding, we come together and work and build a movement. The development cooperation sometimes creates a divide because the funding will go separately and separates us. But if we stand together and we're not separated, the bigger giants, if they get funding and they work in collaboration with the small organizations that are at the grassroots level, utilizing the local-led adaptation principles, will be able to work together and not compete for the resources. The old people like us, we need the young people because they've got energy, they've got the know-how. Right now, when I was coming here, I had to scan a lot with my phone, and I used the young people to do that. And they relied on my wisdom to say, by the way, why are we here? What is the agenda? What are we supposed to bring from our countries? So if we stand together, we need both the experience and the energy, the knowledge and the resources, and those that can speak the loudest. Thank you.
Thanks so much. If I can ask this last colleague for a very brief intervention, just because we want to give everyone a last word before we wrap up. Oh, I'm sorry. So 2 brief interventions, here and then here.
Okay, I will try to be brief as possible. My name is Eunice Mensah. I work with the UN on policy and human rights issues. In
Ghana.
Yes, in Ghana, yes. Yes, Jeff knows me, hence the Ghanaian context. You've given us away. Anyway, so there are a couple of things that I just quickly, as this discussion went by, I wanted to flag for us to have a discussion about. One of it is the peculiarity of the Ghanaian context. Because when, for instance, Magdalene was speaking about, he said independence on one side, and then he said on the other side there's a revolution from within. And then I saw the colleague from LGBT Rights Ghana step up and then be like the old people and the young people. You can already see the tension sort of like spiking up in Ghana. And one of the things is what I would rather classify as a sort of hardline approach to this versus a diplomatic approach to this. Because, for instance, there were billboards put up around Pride Month in Ghana to sort of just say that we are all equal. And those billboards, in fact, didn't have LGBT language on it. They just had the colors, and they just had like very neutral language and said, we are all equal. Someone identified it and got those billboards pulled down. Then there was a backlash against the LGBT. It's part of these tensions. I'm trying to be brief. But I'm just using that to explain that in terms of the dynamics from, on one hand, the independence of doing this versus the diplomacy, it is even still unclear within the LGBT community in Ghana how to proceed. And it would be great if the panelists, because I noticed that for Nigeria, for instance, there's a hostile approach. In South Africa, you seem to be more progressive because some of the things, frankly, Liberty, that you were talking about, I'm like, I don't know if Ghana is ready for that in terms of breaking legal barriers, inclusivity, representation on the table. Like, they just want to even be able to say hi in the room and then not have people. So I think in terms of, just to sort of wrap up what my curiosity is, in terms of the specific context, if there could be guidance on, for, again, Ghanaians, in looking at this bill, because it's very hostile. The faith-based organizations are at the front of this, and it would be great to have clarity on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Eunice. And I'm sorry, we really just have 5 minutes. So 1 minute, please, and then we have 1 minute from each of our panelists.
Yes, mine is just a quick question to Flavian specifically. I agree that movement building in this day and age is very important in our work, that we should leverage on the expertise and the strengths that we have to ensure that the impact of our work is great and strong. And so it's also important for us to be cognizant of the fact that we work with people from different backgrounds and in different contexts. And so in terms of accountability, how have you ensured that you uphold your organization's values and principles as you work with other partners? So for example, when you say we ensure inclusivity in our course of work and we lead, how have you ensured that you hold other partners that you work with accountable for that as well? Thank you.
Thank you. It's incredibly frustrating that we're getting into these important issues, and there's a lot of I think recognized solidarity here, but it's great that from Ghana and elsewhere there really are challenges. And as Flavian said, there's challenges also about money and power and access, and these are real things. And so this has to be the beginning of a conversation that continues. And with that, if I can ask each of our panelists just with a one-sentence closing reflection. Liberty, can I start with you?
Yeah, Jeff, that's a tall ask for one sentence closing. Can we push it to 3 sentences? I've already wasted 3. I think to the one comment from the floor around the different contexts that we exist in on the continent, we must recognize that and of course be able to shape responses that is aligned to the realities within those contexts. South Africa is vastly different to Ghana, and I think the strategies that has worked in the country is different to what can work in Ghana, and for me as a panelist, not well suited and best placed to be able to define what that looks like, and I think that is an important acknowledgement. In terms of looking at just healthcare in general, we still have a long way to go in just something as simple as sensitizing healthcare service providers to create an enabling environment for LGBTQI plus people to want to access health. And so we need to fill that gap. And there's a lot that the HIV response and movement can learn from the broader queer justice movement in the different contexts. We need to invest a lot more in cross-movement dialogues and solidarity building to make sure that we break down the artificial divides that have been erected. On the one end, HIV responses do promote human rights and health rights, but at the same time, broader social justice and gender justice work also supports the HIV response. And so how do we have that intersectional conversation? And I think lastly, we must invest more in movement building and capacity strengthening of our own community members. Many times we are being told that our community members don't have the capacity to lead programming and the response, and therefore there's technical expertise and skills required. And that is something that we need to debunk through our actions, because we are actually well placed and best placed to be able to lead an effective response. And just the last point around the contradictions or the tension between established organizations and emerging and nascent organizations. We need to invest in internal solidarity building and movement building in order to reflect and define what does it mean to build movements that share power with one another and be able to be accountable to each other in leading strong, resilient responses for sustainability in our advancement of human rights and health rights on the continent.
Thanks so much, Liberty. Flavian, good luck following that up.
Sure. Wow, Liberty, thanks. I guess I'll be a little bit more brief, and maybe I won't answer your question comprehensively. I do think where we should start from is being open to check ourselves. I think a lot of this work, we need to recognize that we are in an industry. We are in an industry that excludes other people. The first time you come in, you don't use words like intersectionality. You know, we start getting super sophisticated in the way we think we need to talk, in the way we think we need to participate. You need to speak a certain language. You need to know these acronyms off the top of your head just to participate and have access to a room. For me, the key to participation starts with decolonizing even that. The language that we use excludes others. The way we walk, the way we participate, our own access excludes others. And I can share with you what we've done in detail a little bit more, but I think it's important to recognize that the sophistication and somewhat gatekeeping of these spaces, we need to constantly interrogate there where we have access, how we allow others to participate in those spaces, and to constantly check ourselves around how, in a very intrinsic and possibly unmeant way, we often exclude others from spaces because of our own access and I guess the industry we are in and that we perpetuate. So yeah, it starts with the attitude. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Mac Darling, if you're still with us, any brief closing sentence from you?
Yes,
you've got lighting.
Yes, thank you. I think, thank you for, I appreciate the comment by all the panelists and the colleagues from there who made the comment. But I think the angle is that I think the fight and the struggle should actually be to donors. Because, for instance, sometimes when you look at HIV intervention in Africa, and especially support from Global Fund and USAID PEPFAR, the strategy they use for implementation of their program are not understood by local activists, because they give you the money. Sometimes the PR who receive the resources gives you the resources and gives you his or her own budget to implement the program. to the extent that whatever activity you think is okay for your community, the PR will tell you, we can't give you that resources if we are not giving it to, for instance, female sex workers. And so your hands are tied in terms of even where to go, how to organize community members, how to engage with constituency you represent. And so you have little in terms of what you can do on your own. And sometimes you also have that feeling because people think it is you. But then the thing is that even how much you are paid is determined by the PR. And so we are all in that situation where we are looking at how can the donor change the style of funding so that community members' voices will be part of the process. And that is, for me, it should go to donors and not for some of us who are classified as the elderly. Because for me, I understand where all my colleagues are coming from because I've been there before where I think, okay, the style of the implementation is not helping. But unfortunately, I cannot change that system because Global Fund want that system that way. And they push and they make sure that the PR, who is the principal recipient, becomes the most powerful, the most... It takes how much you should get. And then they, even when Global Fund come and you give them whatever the grievances from the community, they will tell you they don't have a contract with you, but they have contract with your PR. So I think we should look at it from that angle, USAID angle, Global Fund angle. Thank you.
Thank you for flagging the importance of donor issues. And also don't forget LGBTI donors. It's not just HIV donors. Fisayo, we're 2 minutes over time, but you get the last word.
I think just to add, it's be around, there's a adage in my language that says one road doesn't lead to the market. So we have to understand in this work that we do that one size approach doesn't fit everything. It is okay for someone for some movement, some activists to be the disruptive angle. It is okay for you to be your angle and say, I have the terminologies, I have the terms, this is the work that I want to do. So everything we have to do is to understand that at the long run, we are all pushing for the same agenda. So it is okay, let us come together, synergize, but one size does not fit all. Let us understand that.
What a wonderful group. My only frustration is that we're 2 minutes over time. There'll be a break for 13 minutes right now. And then at 3:15, yes, for those of you in this time zone, there'll be another session in this room on innovative strategies to counter criminalization and discriminatory laws. So building on, not just on LGBTI issues, but discriminatory laws and criminalization relevant to HIV more broadly. Thank you to these wonderful panelists and Mac Darling.